So yeah, my name's Chris Cleary. I'm with MCPA. I kind of wear two other titles. I'm a reservist in the Navy, 23-year intelligence officer. I'm also I work for Tenable Network Security in my day job, where I do business development and cyber strategy for those guys. These words are completely my own, to not be affiliated with anything else. But what I wanted to talk about really was, at the end of the day, what the commercial role in cyber warfare is going to be. And the idea is, and I love this venue as an example, right? There's a lot of things in this venue that go boom. And the cyber world is getting closer to that. We can argue whether Pandora's box has been open enough and whether we're tiptoeing from a non-kinetic standpoint to start building applications that are specifically designed with warfare uses in them, weapons, if you will. We're moving in that direction. It's going to happen. This is me in a nutshell. And the reason I bring this slide up, the last 10 years of my career was bouncing back and forth between active duty and the reserves. So I'd go to CyberCom for a little bit, and I'd go back to the Corps Commercial world for a little bit. And you really saw that unique syncing up of what the military was trying to do in U.S. Cyber Command and what the commercial world, as far as tools, were trying to provide. There's still a little bit of a disconnect. I think we still use some words interchangeably. Security and defense do not mean the same thing. The DoD gets that, the commercial world doesn't, and we just got to kind of move towards this war footing that is now going to support organizations like this. So I just want to set the stage for a minute. And when I was at CyberCom, I had this kind of epiphany. And when you look back at 1994, when the DoD, the Army, the Marine Corps had requirements for a low observable, high endurance ISR platform, they came and they created the Predator. And that was a classified CIA Air Force program to create this drone. Well, a couple years later, somebody said, hey, maybe I can hang a missile off that thing. And you created this Hellfire-equipped Predator, again, classified weapon system, kind of worked on itself. It really wasn't recognized. You advance a few more years, and they say, well, if we can build the Predator, we can build something bigger. We'll call it the Reaper. Same thing, carry more armament. And by 2008, you were standing down National Guard F-16 squadrons and standing up Reaper squadrons. By 2013, this product was completely commercialized and being sold overseas. In 2016, if you take it to today, I think there's like 7 or 8 countries flying the Reaper, to include armed versions of the Reaper. The British have conducted something like 130 armed attacks with that thing. So my point is, it started classified, weaponized, standardized, commercialized. So, and within a relatively short period of time, if you think about it, I believe cyber is going in this direction. Well, why do I believe that? So again, ISR started as an ISR platform, became a weapon system. So the rise of the mission force. So in 2008, I was at US Cybercom, which at the time was still Joint Forces Component Commander Network Warfare. In and there was an interesting thing that happened that period of time. Joint Task Force Global Network Operations, it was a DISA thing, came over and eventually started sitting side saddle with us, and eventually we became one organization. But when I was supporting the JFCCNW guys, even inside of SCIFs, we could not say things like computer network attack. So 2008, 2009 timeframe, even in our uniforms, even in SCIFs, the National Security Agency hated when we would say the word attack, because that was the blending, the coming together of this Title 10 and Title 50 world, keeping them, bringing them together as a mission, but having to separate them out when they went to go execute mission. So if you think about the first slide that I showed with the Predators, and you think about what was interesting about the building of this mission force. So in 2010, they stand up U.S. Cyber Commands. So they took, Joint Force, JTF, GNO, and JFCCNW, combined it under one organization, create U.S. Cybercom. In 2013, we activate the National Mission Force. And the interesting thing is, when they activated the National Mission Force, they actually said that OCO, or Offensive Cyber Operations, it's part of its job. So they're going to man and train and operate the gig, the DODN. They're going to conduct defensive and offensive operations, which would be, you'd kind of think that's what a DoD does, right? There's no secret there. So now we've begun to talk about offensive operations. By 2016, we were going to be IOC with the National Mission Force, 133 mission teams divvied across all 4 services, comprising about, the numbers have grown, I'm sure they're not completely accurate, but about 5 to now over 6,000 guys that are manning these teams. So how are we going to equip these guys? So the other story I used to tell when I was at the fort, which I thought was kind of interesting, if you looked at, use the special forces community as an example. You know, we started with traditional soldiers, and at some point they said we have to specialize this community, and we created special forces teams. In cyber, we're kind of going in the other direction. In cyber, we started with these special forces teams in cyber, these really specialized, high demand, low density elements that work within certain organizations within the intelligence community. And now we're trying to figure out what massive cyber looks like. So how do you equip those guys? Well, and so we stood up this national mission force. They do three primary things. They operate the DODN, they defend the United States when directed, and they support combatant commands with those 133 teams. But this is kind of what I want to talk about, and this is where the commercial world starts coming into this. So now that I've got 6,200 guys and 133 mission teams divvied up all over the world, how do I equip those guys, and how do I think about standardizing the equipment that we give them? So for instance, this shows sort of a representation of how those teams are sort of dispersed, whether they do internal defensive cyber operations or external, or they support combatant commanders directly. But the things that they're tasked to do, regardless where they are, sort of live in that box in the middle, which is offensive and defensive cyber operations, cyber ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and cyber OPE, or operational preparation of the environment. So the teams are manned and trained. Well, how are they equipped to do these things? Albert Rogers said an interesting thing a couple of years ago, and he said, you know, we've been building tools for a long time internally, and because the teams that we've been deploying to have been so small and so specialized, it's something that we've been able to maintain internal to our organizations at small scales. But he was even saying that 3, 4, 5 years into the future, how does this scale? How does industry begin to get involved to build these capabilities and sustain these capabilities? There is not a government organization that makes any of the equipment in this vendor hall right now. These are all commercial companies who make their livings off building capability off the requirements of the government and then selling that back into those mission spaces. Again, the government doesn't make anything. They simply provide requirements for that equipment to be made. I believe cyber is no different. So cyber weapon systems, and this is kind of where this begins to go. So in 2016, I came across an article. I was searching something on the internet, and the Air Force had released a news press talking about the Cyber Vulnerability Assessment Hunter Weapons System, which, again, you can read the slide. I'm not going to bore you with it. But they called out something very specific at the bottom, and that's what's highlighted in that yellow box. It said, look, this is a weapons system because this is how we're going to fund, and this is how we're going to do programmatic acquisition of these things. We're going to begin to call them weapon systems because we can drive money to them easier than we do, let's say, IT systems. And if you look at, I think, where the world is going as an example, IT systems are always the budgets that get cut near the end of the year. But nobody cuts budgets on weapon systems. There's a lot of things that we bought in this vendor hall that'll never be used. But the cybersecurity tools that we use every day, those budget line items get smaller and smaller, and arguably people don't like spending money on those tools. So when I read about the cyber weapon system, one thing kind of hit me. I said, man, this sounds really, really familiar. So I'm going to go back. I work at Tenable Network Security. I said, this sounds a lot like what we do as a company, the tools that we provide as a company. Lo and behold, what I found out is that one of our products called Nessus Professional is part of this weapon system. The Air Force buys it commercially, rolls it into a weapon system. So that got me thinking, well, that's really interesting, right? We don't position ourselves as a weapon system, but certain DoD elements have begun to look at us in that way. So I talked through this idea of, tactical to practical, right? So, or practical to tactical. So, and I'm going to use a Nessus example. So in 2005, Renaud Dassault and a couple other guys created the Nessus scanner. It today, many, many years later, is the most popular scanner on the planet. A few years later, in 1998, they turned it into a product. By 2012, the ACAS program was standing up, and the Tenable host of solutions, our technology stack, is basically what makes up the ACAS program to do vulnerability management and compliance across the entire Department of Defense and Intelligence community. 2016, components of what we've made are now being introduced into weapon systems. So why do we start thinking through this as potentially a problem? So our scanner, as an example, what makes a scanner its ability to do its job is its plugins. So industry will come out and say, these are known vulnerabilities in our systems. We go ahead and create plugins designed to look for those vulnerabilities. Then we put them in a server, and then we pump them to the DoD, and the DoD pumps them out to the rest of the force. Well, currently we have over 80,000 of these plugins available. And it reminds me of a little story. So in 1943, in the height of one of the major strategic bombing campaigns in Europe, we started deciding that we have to go after critical infrastructure inside of Germany to degrade their war-fighting capability. And you already heard this say, we're bombing ball bearing factories, right? It was always ball bearing factories. Well, ball bearings were seen as a critical component of the war machine through tanks, tank treads, aircraft motors, engines. And we said we can degrade the supply of ball bearings to these production facilities, will ultimately slow down the productions of airplanes. So they started going after critical nodes to degrade war-fighting capability. Well, now let's think about our 80,000 plugins again. We're the only company that provides these to the Department of Defense. It kind of puts us on as a critical node in supply chain interdiction for these kinds of missions. If I can't provide new plugins into the environment, ultimately the scanners that you guys have deployed begin to atrophy over time. And if I strategically attacked some of these people that provide these equipment, I may have a 0 day that I'm waiting to use. I may be able to degrade the ability for a commercial company to push out the plugin that can then go look for that 0 day after I've begun to use it. And now the DoD can't find the thing that I'm attacking on a regular basis unless they can create that plugin organically. So the idea is, as commercial providers, a couple things. And I kind of blew through this brief, and we can talk for a little bit. Actually, it's more of an interesting discussion than anything else. So I said Pandora's box is open, right? The weaponization of cyberspace is here. I am convinced in this vendor hall in the next 2 to 4 years, you're going to see a cyber pavilion where people are presenting war-fighting capability in cyber, where they're making tools specifically designed to destroy or degrade other capabilities. Not dual-use technology, things, again, sold as weapons. It's a think piece, it's a belief piece. I feel pretty strongly about it. You get some of the defense industrial, the integrators are already doing things like that. But I think you're going to get other companies that start jumping into that market. The offensive cyber mission is no longer discussed in the shadows. This is not a secret anymore that we conduct offensive cyber operations. Now, we're not going to talk about how we do them or when we do them. It's kind of like talking about stealth technology. I know it's out there. I know we have stealth airplanes. You're not going to tell me how stealth works. I don't necessarily need to know how it works. I just know that we have the ability to defeat certain radars or fly undetected, which gives me egress capability to certain countries. I know it's out. It's classified, but I know it exists. The DoD is actively seeking capability. This is where things like the ACAS program, the Cyber Vulnerability Assessment Hunter Weapons System, all these other things, which leads into the next one. They're also looking to repurpose existing capabilities. I'll use Nessus as the example. Nessus, turned on its ear, very quickly becomes a denial of service tool. For matter of fact, the scanner, all scanners can be turned on their ear and become offensive capability if you choose to use them in that fashion. But it's not what it was designed to do, it's what it can do. And lastly, DoD doesn't have all the answers, right? Commercial industry, at the end of the day, are the ones that are innovating, even in this room, to make new products, new weapons, new missiles, new bombs, better armor, better armaments, that keeps the DoD able to fight in its respective mission spaces. I think cyber is no different. And again, exciting times for those willing to take a risk. It was fast and quick because it's near the end of the day and I know everybody's trying to get out of here, so I sort of went through that quickly. But it's more of an interesting think piece, debate point. I try and raise some of these things actually to poke the bear a little bit. I don't profess to have all the answers. Some of these are interesting, very contentious topics. We can go down a million little rabbit holes. Any questions?